This Sunday's gospel is not one that sits easily with many of us. Jesus healing the sick and disabled. I like that Jesus. Jesus feeding the multitude. I like that Jesus. Jesus preaching love for God and neighbor. I like that Jesus. Even Jesus getting into it with religious and political rulers. I like that Jesus. Jesus saying, "You will have the poor always, but you will not always have me." Not so much. It makes me very uncomfortable. Often enough, a part of me agrees with Judas on this one. A year's wages, $20,000 to $40,000 in today's money, spent on perfume, that is just dumped on Jesus' feet, seems excessive and wasteful. And it made the evangelist John uncomfortable because he was quick to point out that Judas was not really objecting because he cared about the poor. Judas was just upset that he didn't have the chance to take the money for himself. It also made several early scribes so uncomfortable that this response of Jesus is removed from several early manuscripts, including some that serve as the official texts of modern Eastern Rite churches. Jesus is supposed to be humble. Jesus is supposed to put others first. Jesus is supposed to be perfect, and yet here he is acting like some self-centered cult leader. It doesn't seem to fit with the Jesus we see everywhere else. So what are we meant to make of this passage? Well, each of the Gospels has a version of this story, but each version is different. In Mark, the woman opens the jar, but in Matthew, Luke, and John, or in Mark, she breaks open the jar, but in Matthew, Luke, and John, she just opens the jar. Now, when we hear break open, we tend to imagine that she has cracked it open into two pieces. But this was a time before grooved caps were a thing. So, more likely, we are meant to imagine that this woman in Mark broke the stopper off. So while an expensive perfume is being opened up for the first time for this act, it is not necessarily all used on this occasion. It is just it's just that once it was unsealed, the perfume started to lose its scent. In Mark and Matthew, the perfume is poured on Jesus' head. But as we read today in John and again in Luke, the woman poured the perfume on his feet and dried it off with her hair. And in Matthew and Mark, the woman is unnamed, and the event occurred in Bethany, but as at the house of Simon the leper rather than that of Lazarus. While in Luke, she is a woman of ill repute at the house of a Pharisee. Only in John is she the named Mary of Bethany in her own home. So we need to be careful in either conflating these different versions in our minds or taking any one of them as a factual event. Something like this really happened. Some woman anointed Jesus in the days before the crucifixion with expensive perfume, and rather than rebuke her, Jesus commended her for it. In the decades to follow, this event had such a profound impact on the witnesses to it and their followers that it was remembered and spoken about repeatedly. But the details became unclear, and each storyteller filled them in to fit his message. So, what was John trying to say with the passage today? Well, in John's gospel, we are told that the plot to kill Jesus is already afoot. And more than that, the plot has expanded to a plan to kill Lazarus as well, because Lazarus stands as living proof of the extraordinariness of who Jesus is. If Lazarus went back to being dead, then Jesus could just have been another backwater faith healer and preacher from the slums of Galilee. So in this moment, Mary chooses to not only welcome Jesus into the home she shares with her sister and brother, but to declare publicly by prophetic action, Jesus is going to be killed very soon. And when he does, it is going to be dangerous to be seen performing the usual rituals of burial. But here and today, I am pledging to follow him to the end and beyond, even if it means my own death. Mary is taking up the role of the true disciple, of obligating herself to continue Jesus' mission after Jesus' death. Her actions are echoed in the supper that we will celebrate on Maundy Thursday, when Jesus similarly performs an act of absolute humility by washing the feet of his disciples. And her actions are contrasted with those of Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, who, while being remembered to be followers of Jesus, who had the wealth and power to ask Pilate for Jesus' body and to wrap it in perfumes and linens before placing it in Joseph's own tomb, did so in secret. Mary is being portrayed as the model disciple, the one who does not simply follow Jesus in secret, but follows Jesus with full abandon, not worrying about how it will impact her safety or her standing in society. When Jesus commends her for her actions, he is not saying that the poor don't matter. What he is saying is that it is important to do the good that you can do in the here and the now, not just continually planning for some greater good that you could potentially do sometime down the road. But he is also saying that she has taken up the call to true discipleship and should not be condemned for that. And as tomorrow is the anniversary of his assassination, I cannot help but think that Martin Luther King Jr. followed in Mary's footsteps. He did not have to go to Memphis. The Civil Rights Act had already been passed 4 years earlier. He could have lived out a long and comfortable life as an international speaker and author, as many of his contemporaries did. And really, if he had, no one would have thought ill of him. He did his part for racial justice, for civil and human rights. His job was done. But instead, he took up the cause of the working poor, of those whose working conditions were dangerous and even deadly, whose hours were long and whose pay was too low to survive on. And that was why he was in Memphis. Public workers were being forced to work unpaid overtime, and 2 men had died when the dilapidated garbage truck they had been sent out with malfunctioned and crushed them to death. Dr. King went to Memphis to stand with striking workers to ensure that they had access to safe working conditions and wages with which they could support their families, and he was killed while doing it. When we are called to be disciples, we are not called simply to do what is comfortable and easy, but sometimes we are called to do the difficult, humiliating, and dangerous as well, to follow the path of Mary and Martin, to truly be Christ in the world. Amen.